The Nunes Memo has now been released, and it has made one thing clear. We have been wasting a lot of time in this country on absolute BS, and we will continue to, but hopefully for not that much longer. Because unfortunately, we've been put in a difficult position where the GOP and Donald Trump have decided that they are going to shred law and order in this country, and they are going to set fire to the FBI to absolve him of any legal ramifications for the things that he and his campaign have done. And because they're doing that, we are forced to respond. There might have been a little bit of spin on that introduction. Feel free to disagree, but that's how I feel about it at this point.
I'd underline that introduction. I think that's exactly right, but please proceed.
Okay, so look, the memo is out. Hopefully you've read it. It's not long. I imagine that most people in this country have read it, probably not Donald Trump, but he's at least claiming that he is. And so we're gonna go through a few of the core claims of this memo, the things that supposedly are such big bombshells that are included in it. Now, the first one is that this memo describes itself as describing a troubling breakdown of legal processes. Specifically, it says, our findings, which are detailed below, raise concerns with the legitimacy and legality of certain DOJ and FBI interactions with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and represent a troubling breakdown of legal processes established to protect the American people from abuses related to the FISA process. Now, the overall problem with that introduction is that the memo does not actually do that. It barely even attempts to do that. What it does do is describe what they see as things that were left out of the applications to the FISA court for surveillance of Carter Page, who is perhaps one of the most suspicious people in this entire mess, all of which is suspicious. And so we know that the FBI began surveilling Carter Page. They continually re-upped it because of all of his suspicious contacts with Russian intelligence operatives and things like that. And now we're supposed to believe that because they didn't accurately describe that the dossier, which the memo says is why they're surveilling him, but it's not actually clear that that is why they were surveilling him, that they didn't make clear all of the various people that had funded it along the way. And because of that, that whole thing is suspect, and something Robert Mueller as well.
I mean, it feels like just like a Reddit blog post. That's the way the memo is. I mean, many people have been saying, like, it doesn't sound like, it's not a memo, it's a press release. It's a press release from Republicans unilaterally on the Intelligence Committee saying, anti-Trump, right? And that, to me, there's like so many things to this, but the words anti-Trump, which appear in this memo, I found to be chilling, because that's not something you expect from an intelligence committee to call something anti-Trump. What does that mean? Does it by saying something's anti-Trump, you're automatically politicizing and making it partisan rather than explaining, whether bias, exactly, why something's inaccurate, right? And the other thing is, Carter Page was being investigated by the FBI before he joined the Trump campaign. And this is something that they kind of allude to, but don't really, so they're sort of revealing the fact that he was already under surveillance. So I guess those things are the ones that stood out to me.
And you're so right about the anti-Trump thing really reveals what this is, which is it's propaganda. And Devin Nunes is a lackey for Trump. And the fact that he's on this committee is almost a footnote, because he is going to crank out propaganda that is favorable to the president, and that's exactly what this document is. It left out a lot of stuff that we know, and the FISA filing that they have to make is so thick. I mean, who knows what we don't know? But we certainly are aware of the fact that Carter Page had a relationship there that raised concerns of law enforcement in this country prior to this whole thing. But they make it look like a political hit, when the reality, of course, is this memo is a political hit, or it's an attempt at a political hit. Were this any sort of objective process, you'd think, all right, this has a chance of being seen as a big dud, as a big nothing burger. I saw that today. It's a big nothing burger. But make no mistake about it, this serves the purpose that they want, which is it gives them a piece of paper that now justifies Trump firing Rosenstein. And that's all. It could have been a blank piece of paper. They just want an excuse, Trump does, to fire Rosenstein.
And so going back, that would set up Rosenstein, who oversees the Mueller investigation, and so it sort of lays up the domino pieces to eventually
get rid of
Mueller or completely limit his capacity to do the investigation.
Yeah, and so I'm going to jump back into the core claims in just a second, but you sort of mentioned something in this line. One of the I think ironic, sad consequences of this, once we get past the initial fervor over the memo, is there are all sorts of justifiable, legitimate, and necessary criticisms of the FISA court, of the FBI. But when people see this, where this has been hyped for weeks now as this is what's wrong with the DOJ and we're gonna finally unveil it, and then it turns out to be BS. When you have legitimate concerns about these organizations, you too are gonna look like a crazy person now because they've been demonized for over a year by the White House and right-wing media.
Right, I mean, I think this is what gets me about this, like that suddenly the party of let's invade 2 countries, let's warrantlessly wiretap all Americans, is now the party of being against the deep state. Like, oh yeah, no, now we're anti-establishment. Bullshit, man. You guys aren't anti-establishment. And so it's the only thing worse than the deep state is having the deep state completely politicized in a partisan way to support someone who's clearly done something illegal. And I'm not saying that like it hasn't been politicized and the deep state isn't like against, working against and surveilling Americans or surveilled, people from Martin Luther King Jr. to, grandmothers protesting the war in Iraq. But my God, even I am like a total bleeding heart radical, like I'm just like, God, the pillars of democracy. But wait.
Well, I mean, you're right. It's not as though the FBI has got a clean record historically, but
or even recently, and well, less perhaps the FBI than some of the other intelligence organizations, but that is a concern.
But that all of a sudden there are political hit jobs being put out. It just doesn't pass the smell test. And if they really were, and I love that they use the word transparent. Well, in the interest of transparency, we wanted to release it. In the interest of transparency, though, we suppressed the Democrat document, the Democratic response, in effect. Look, this is scary because it takes a highly partisan Washington, and it will allow them, because the GOP is in control of the entire city, legislatively and beyond, in the executive branch and in the courts, it will allow them to, I think, on a grand scale, set up an authoritarian position for the president, and that's really what he wants. I mean, I know that seems sort of, that's, oh, come on, you're exaggerating, but I don't see blowback on this. I don't see where there's going to be blowback.
Yeah, and I've been telling people for over a year, so some people for various reasons have not been interested in this investigation since the very beginning. And I've been trying to appeal to them to say that while yes, Donald Trump and his Republican backers would love to absolve him of this investigation, what they are attempting to do is destroy the possibility of any investigation into any corruption or illegality. Once they've done it to the FBI here, once they've cleansed it as Paul Ryan says he wants to, that is going to open the path for any other form of corruption that they want and make it so that there won't be any effective investigations. But to return to the core claims, the one example they give is this Carter Page thing, the idea that the FISA application for renewal, this is a guy they've been investigating for literally years, since like 2013. That's the guy they're staking their reputation on here, was fraudulent. But the problem is they didn't actually show that in the memo either. They say that details about the dossier weren't provided, but they can't actually show it because we don't have access to that information. We have to simply trust that Devin Nunes or his staff or the White House, we're not entirely sure.
Devin Nunes?
Not on face alone.
After that Uber ride to the White House, last year, just late night.
I mean, granted, he had insider information since it seems this was written with the White House, but even so, I'm not sure we can trust them.
But that seems to be written by the White House, right? Wasn't he interviewed before it was, or during the meeting to release this memo? He was asked whether the memo was written in discussion with the White House or was anyone discussing, and he shut that conversation down. So he really didn't answer yes or no. He might have been completely sitting there drafting it and Republicans on the committee drafting it with the White House.
Well, by the way, just on this point, I mean, when asked if Trump was going to release the memo, he hadn't seen it. And first, and as John says, there's all this stuff, this aura built up around this memo, and that was designed to gain media attention. Look, it's dominating the media culture for the last week. The memo, the memo, the memo. Even as Trump entered for the State of the Union, he was asked, are you going to release the memo? But he had indicated he was going to release the memo. Remember, he had said, oh, 100% I'm going to release it. He hadn't read it yet. So it's up. The fix is so in it's so nakedly in that it's nauseating.
Yeah. Another core claim of this, both of the memo, but especially of the right-wing spin about the memo, is that the investigation, all of this stuff, has a lot to do with the dossier, basically.
Right.
They think that even though much of what's in the dossier hasn't been disproven at all, a lot of it turned out to be true, if they can link it to the dossier, which they're trying to do, then the entire thing is illegitimate. But that's undercut not just by reality, but even by the memo itself, because on the last page of the memo, it says the Papadopoulos information triggered the opening of an FBI counterintelligence investigation in late July 2016 by FBI agent Peter Strzok. Obviously, they just say it's Peter Strzok. It's the FBI, but they think he's a bad guy, so they're going to link it to him.
They want to pin it on one person. I mean, that's really insidious to just name FBI officials by name. Anyway,
exactly,
house.
And we know that they had been doing the investigation prior to that, so that is undercut literally by the evidence even provided by the memo. But if they're going to bring up Strzok, let's talk about him. So they're using him as an example, and this is one of the core claims of this memo, is that the entire thing is not just about the dossier, but it is an example of, from the very beginning, bias against Donald Trump, anti-Trump stuff, basically.
Anti-Trump.
And they say in the memo, Strzok was reassigned by the special counsel's office to FBI Human Resources for improper text messages with his mistress, FBI attorney Lisa Page, where they both demonstrated a clear bias against Trump and in favor of Clinton, whom Strzok had also investigated. And that is a particularly brazen thing to leave in the memo days after we find out that Peter Strzok, who we already knew hated Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, was literally the guy pushing for them to reopen the investigation in Hillary Clinton's emails a week before the election. So if that's the guy,
slow down. What are you saying? The same guy who was worried about, who didn't want Trump to be president, also, or was, had sort of anti-Trump bias, was also pushing to reopen the Hillary Clinton emails.
That's what it
How
seems
can
to
that be?
Exactly. You know what? We probably shouldn't even talk about it.
No, don't talk about it. Well, I mean, the threat, it's just so thin, right? It is just that that the dossier was, they don't say it was commissioned by actually GOP operatives and Republicans who wanting to hire Fusion GPS initially, and then it was picked up by the DNC and Hillary Clinton. That's completely missing. Also, I think it's really funny. Christopher Steele in this there's some quote in the memo that's like, was concerned that Donald Trump would become president, right? Now, this is a guy who'd been studying Donald Trump for months at that point and his links and connections to Russia. And he's concerned about Trump becoming president. Like, it's not bias, it's just information. It's like saying that Neil deGrasse Tyson is biased against flat earthers. The dude's been studying it for his whole life.
He's concerned about him.
Right.
Yeah, exactly, you can't say that. So, and the other person who was concerned about Donald Trump becoming president was Donald Trump, all right?
His family.
And that dude's been studying Donald Trump for like 70 years. So I think we all were concerned. He just said something about it anyway.
You just watched the video by the Young Turks, home of the revolution. If you'd like to get a lot more than that, get the full show by becoming a member. tytnetwork.com/join.